Welcome back to another Giant Slayer video. It's time for Tier List Thursdays. Today's tier list is brought to you by our Grand Masters to Challenger Analysts. Less than a week before the new patch hits, so start recognizing which synergies are best so you can get your climb going before the meta changes again. But before we begin, don't forget to click the links in our description. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting news to come. The interest form is down below, so feel free to fill that out if you'd like to complete. Be sure to follow Giant Slayer TV on all the social media platforms and check out our amazing cast in the description. Alright, so let's jump into the tier list. One thing to keep in mind is that even if a synergy is at a D tier, it doesn't mean it can't be part of a winning composition. Set 2 has been made so that you can play a variety of comps and still end up in the top 4. Our tier list will be based on what we see most consistently at the top 4 and how easy it is to hit that synergy. So let us begin with the S tier. With our S tier, we have Warden, Assassin, Ocean, Poison/Alchemist, and Avatar. Starting with Warden, if you've been playing any TFT games at all, you'll know that Wardens have been dominating the meta. It creates a proper frontline to protect your carries, and the Warden units themselves are actually incredibly impressive on their own. You have units like Thresh and Nautilus who provide Ocean as well, and when you get to the late game, units like Malphite and Amumu provide intense crowd control. With all this combined, it sounds insanely strong. 6 Warden can be a bait unless you somehow get a lobby full of Berserkers and Assassins, but 2 and 4 Wardens is well-rounded and used in almost every single composition. Next up, we've got Assassins. With a big nerf to Phantom Dancers, Assassins really get to shine this patch. Popular in both the Blender and Summoners comps, they get easy access to the backline of your opponent and easily kill off their squishy carries. 3 Assassins is fairly easy to put in, making it a great mid-game synergy or late-game transition. It's perfect when you see an abundance of Ocean Mage players. Speaking of Ocean Mage, next on our list is Ocean. Ocean is very simple. It allows your team to ult quicker. There's no complaints here as it works great in Mage and Summoner compositions, but can basically be thrown into almost anything. The best part about Ocean is that almost all the units are very low cost. 4 Oceans can actually be completed using only 1, 2, and 3 cost units. Oceans give you a decent mid game and it buys you time to be able to find one of the best units in the game who's also an Ocean, and that's Nami. Continuing on with our S tier, we have Poison and Alchemist. Poison is a little more situational depending on the lobby, but has been seen to be one of the best synergies transitioning into the later game. Mages and Summoners are extremely common in these games, allowing this synergy to shine. But the strongest part of the Poison composition is, of course, its marquee unit, Singed. Morellonomicon with a Singed 2 will normally grant you an easy top 4. His innate synergy Alchemist is exclusive only to him, and therefore by default lands it in the S tier. One of the best parts of the synergy, though, is that you can actually use it to play around your opponent's Zephyr. And similar to Singe, our last synergy is related to a single champion. Avatar also lands in our S tier. Lux has been extremely prevalent in this new meta where challengers rush to 8 and then change their composition depending on which Lux they end up getting. With the exception of Woodland and Light Lux, all other synergies are great to immediately throw in and build your comp around. Now into our A tier. We've got Desert, Inferno, Mystic and Cloud, Summoner, Shadow, Mountain, and Crystal. So let's begin with Desert. Desert is the only synergy that is a direct counter to Wardens, and with them being so popular in today's meta, Desert champions are always great to throw in. Although 4 Desert is not worth it because it has to use the now nerfed Renekton, 2 Desert is more than enough to push out a lot of damage. Kha'Zix is normally the core unit in Desert, but then you add Sivir or Azir depending on if you're running Summoners or Blender. Next up on the list is Inferno. Riot has been trying to include Inferno into the meta for quite a while now. Buff after buff, a few balances, and they finally did it. 9 Infernos is still an incredible bait since your comp will severely lack a tank line relying on only 1 Amumu, but 3 and 6 Infernos are definitely strong. 3 Infernos is the most consistent way to build them, but it still gives you a lot of damage and leaves you the option to pivot into a variety of comps. On the other hand, 6 Infernos is riskier, but once you hit it, many opponents will have a hard time dealing with the intense increase of burning damage. Moving on, the next on our list are Mystic and Cloud. Almost every winning composition will include one or the other in the final stages. The choice is heavily dependent on the lobby you're in. Is your lobby Mage heavy? Mystics are amazing. Blender heavy? Forget Mystics, put in Clouds. Since Janna is both a Cloud and a Mystic, she makes it fairly easy to put in both. their defensive and support synergies and become crucial to push you from 3rd or 4th all the way up to 1st place. Alongside them in our A-list, we also have Summoners. Summoners deal great damage, are proper tanks, and with the units they spawn, they can be used in the early and late game. Like most synergies, you don't push for 6, but 3 Summoners is a great synergy to always add to your comp. Early game Summoners will be a lot more inconsistent though, since they nerfed Zyra. However, the real power spike begins when you can find your Annie, Yorick, or Zed. These are the powerhouses that will help carry your Summoner build. Next up is Shadow. With the addition of Senna, 3 Shadows is simple to put in and a well-balanced synergy with the units you have. We have Scion, who can serve as a great tank, as well as Kindred, who serves as your main carry and also inflicts grievous wounds. Shadow is one of the rare synergies like Inferno that can actually excel when pushing for 6. As always, 6 anything is a bit more inconsistent, but the damage output of 6 Shadows is absolutely insane. If built correctly, definitely a contender for the top 4. Our next synergy is one of our personal favorites, it's Mountain. Mountain is the only one in the A-list that will fall off incredibly hard in the late game. However, they're so strong in the early to mid game, we do believe they deserve this spot in the A tier. It only takes 2 units to proc, and if you hit a mountain map, you're guaranteed that at least half of the lobby will grab Atalia and Kiana to proc this synergy as quickly as they could. The massive shield that the mountain buff provides is just very, very difficult for opponents to get through until they reach the late game. And not to mention, this synergy also uses one of the best CC champions, Malphite. Last but not least in our A tier, it's Crystal. Crystal is probably the hardest synergy to achieve on this list since it requires a tier 2 Taric and or a Crystal Lux to really excel. It's pricey too because you normally have to run an Ashe in order to proc the synergy over the Skarner, meaning that the synergy is reliant on epics and legendaries only. However, if you do hit these units, their power is immense enough to rival, if not even be more powerful than the ones in the S tier. Crystal serves as an amazing counter to comps that rely on an Arcane Gauntlet brand or something like a Nocturne with double IE. If you're able to find a Crystal Lux, we highly recommend you start looking for a Taric to throw in with her. Due to the high difficulty of achieving this synergy though, we've placed it in merely the A tier. Time to move on in the list, we are down to the B tier. We have Woodland Druids, Blademasters, Rangers, Electric, and Berserkers. Let's start off by talking about Woodland Druids. Nice and simple, it's arguably the best early game synergy. Even with a team of just level 1 Druids, you can still beat another player that has a leveled up unit. The extra unit you get, as well as the health regeneration, is just too difficult for most to deal with in the early game. However, it does start falling off in the mid game, and we've seen a lot of players fail to transition as it does require a harder pivot than most. Transition is probably one of the hardest parts of TFT, so the difficulty of transitioning out of Woodland Druids lands it into the B tier, even though it's the best early game synergy. Up next is Blademaster. Blademaster is not bad, but it's also only prevalent in one comp in the meta, and that's Blender. The more that Nocturne attacks, the more his lifesteal procs, and Sivir needs to attack more to be able to trigger Disarm and Hush as much as possible. Blademaster, being an absolutely crucial part of Blender, lands it in our B tier, even though it's the only comp that uses it. Moving on to Rangers, with the buffs in 9.24b, Rangers have been sitting in an interesting spot. From being known as potentially one of the greatest synergies of all times to probably the biggest debate that can throw your games. It's best paired with Inferno or Crystals, but rely heavily on finding an Amumu and or a Taric to bring you over the top. Now we have Electric. Ornn and Volley are solid starter units that can push out a decent amount of damage throughout the early game. However, they do fall off very hard unless you hit that Zed or an Electric Lux. In most cases, people are going to end up rotating out of that Electric comp. Rather than being a synergy that you aim for from the start, it's a synergy you push for only if you see an Electric Lux first. The last comp on our B list here is Berserkers. Berserkers is definitely the type of comp that even some challenger players will force every single game in order to get a top 4 finish. It has a great mid-game power spike when you can hit your Olaf and complete your 6 Berserkers. However, Berserkers do get countered pretty hard by the Warden's meta, so it's becoming more and more reliant on other synergies to bring it over the top. 6 Berserkers does take up a lot of space, making it very hard to pivot, so finding a Berserker spat becomes pretty crucial in helping this transition phase to Desert or Poison. And now we move on to our C tier, that's Mages, Glacial, and Predator. So let's begin with Mages. I know, you might think, but Ocean Warden Mages are so OP right now, doesn't that make it S tier? Well, half of the mages are essentially useless in this comp. You'll never see a LeBlanc or a Vigar used, and 6 mages is never pushed anymore. Even in an Ocean Warden's Mages build, many challengers will actually forfeit the Mage part once they hit their Nami. Unlike most synergies, Mages require a lot of RNG with only a 50% chance of actually succeeding. So sure, if your brand constantly double alts, it does seem great and powerful. But most of the time, removing the Mage synergy for others has just been proving more and more consistent. Next in the C tier is Glacial. Like Mages, RNG synergies are always trickier to place in the high tier because, as it sounds, it does rely on luck. 6 Glacial with the highest percentage to stunge is never worth it, so you're really relying on a 20 to 40% chance in tier 1 or 2 and hoping it works. It's also highly dependent on Olaf as the carry, which requires heavy itemization and a tier 2 for him to survive. Finally, completing our C tier, it's Predators. Hyperroll compositions are just not as powerful anymore since pushing to 8 is such a strong priority these days. If you're able to get lucky with your Hyperroll, then your 3-star champions may be able to carry you to late game. However, most of the time, just hitting a 3-star Kog'Maw will not be enough, making you fall off very hard throughout the mid and late game as everyone fast 8s and destroys you with the Amumus they find. Due to its inconsistency, Predators landed in our C tier. And finally, our last synergy is one that is very inconsistent and extremely hard to win with. The only member of our D tier is Light. Even with the addition of Lucians, Lights are very hard to pull off. Relonomicon is a very common item and it hard counters Light's strength of healing, so hyper rolling Lights is a pretty consistent bottom 4. Most Challenger players will only add 3 Lights just to gain a slight buff, but it's never a main priority. And with that, that is going to be it for today's video. What have been your favorite combination synergies? Let us know in the comments below. As mentioned, just because something is in our C and D tier does not mean it can't be in a winning comp, so we would love to hear what you've been successful with. Be sure to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the future for more Meta Mondays and Tier List Thursdays.